Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. I'm pre-recording my talk, and I expect that we started this conference with acknowledgement of the First Nations peoples. I am speaking to you at Clarke Immigration Law, located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota, and is the birthplace of the Métis Nation and the heart of Métis Nation homeland. This acknowledgement is not perfunctory. As a conference focused on human rights, we need to recognize the human rights that have been violated here in Canada. For the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, Clarke Immigration Law announced pro bono services for Indigenous peoples. I believe it is incumbent on all of us to be part of the solution. Okay, today I've been asked to speak on Article 14 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, namely the right to seek and enjoy asylum from persecution. The declarations were proclaimed by the UN General Assembly in 1948 in the shadow of World War II. Subsequently, member states participated in 4 Geneva Conventions that led to the 1951 Refugee Convention. Immigration lawyers regularly refer to the 1951 Geneva Convention as the foundation for modern refugee law. It is important to note that Canada did not sign the convention until 1969, more than 18 years after it was adopted by the UN. Under Canadian law, the principles have been ratified in Sections 96 and 97 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. For any foreigner in Canada, they may be granted refugee protection or protected person status if they fall within either Section 96 or Section 97. These sections are the backbone of the refugee determination system in Canada, and the particular language of these sections have been heavily litigated. As a practitioner in immigration and refugee law, my job is to help clients navigate the Canadian immigration system. I've represented literally thousands of clients from around the world on all different kinds of immigration applications. Today, I want to share 3 cases with you. These are real cases of real people. The point of the first case is to show how Canadian laws may fail to protect human rights. The second is to show how the Canadian system has adapted to help people who have suffered human rights violations. And the third case is a challenging case that I'm currently handling. The point of the third case is to highlight some of the issues that refugee lawyers in Canada have to deal with in 2021. Finally, I want to propose an expansion of the Canadian refugee system, and I want to get you all involved in helping refugees who need our help. The first story starts in Burundi. The former president of Burundi and his regime committed many human rights violations that have been well documented. The International Criminal Court has been investigating these human rights abuses since 2017. I got involved in 2018 when I got a call from a Burundi journalist trying to cross into Canada. She was at the border in the United States on a visitor visa, and she was attempting to file a claim for refugee protection from the government of Canada. Her sister-in-law, who lives in Winnipeg, was at the border trying to help her to come to Canada. Unfortunately, when she was at the border, the Canadian officers could not allow her to enter because her relationship with her relative was not a relationship of blood. She failed to pass the legal test in the Safe Third Country Agreement. In this case, the agreement mandated that this Burundi journalist file her refugee claim in the United States first, and unless she fell under one of the exceptions, she was not able to come to Canada. The family thought that having a family member in Canada, i.e. a sister-in-law, would grant her access to the Canadian refugee determination system. which is far more humane than the American system. Alas, her relationship with her sister-in-law, a relationship of marriage and not blood, was not sufficient, and she was denied. On a side note, her children, her 3 Burundi children, were allowed to enter, as they had a blood connection with their Canadian aunt. The journalist made a heart-wrenching decision to give her children to her sister-in-law at the border and stay at a women's shelter in the United States near the Canadian border. That's when I got involved. We filed an application for judicial review to federal court. We negotiated with the lawyers at the Department of Justice, and we were able to negotiate with the Canadian government to allow the Burundi journalist to enter Canada. She is now here in Winnipeg with her three Canadian children, with her 3 children, and they are all permanent residents. I have spoken about the so-called Safe Third Country Agreement at national conferences for immigration lawyers and in many news interviews. In my view, this agreement allows Canada to shirk its international human rights obligations. In 2020, Federal Court Justice McDonald determined the Safe Third Country Agreement is unconstitutional and fails to protect human rights. I would encourage you to read this well-reasoned decision by Justice McDonald, as it is based on very strong evidence. This decision, however, was overturned by the Federal Court of Appeal earlier this year. I disagree with this recent decision, and more work needs to be done. The second case refers to the Singh decision by the Supreme Court of Canada, rendered on April 4th, 1985. The reason I mention the date is because April 4th is Refugee Rights Day here in Canada, and that day was chosen specifically because of the Singh decision rendered by the Supreme Court. Prior to the Singh decision, refugee claimants in Canada did not have the right to a hearing. They submitted a written claim only. No testimony, no witnesses. There were many lawyers involved as advocates at the Supreme Court for this decision, but I want to mention in particular Barb Jackman. She is one of the reasons why I fight for my clients. She was my professor at Queen's Law School, and she would talk to me about her cases during breaks. Barb was a young lawyer when she argued the Singh case at the Supreme Court, and she made strong charter arguments, in particular 7-7 arguments, to fight for change. Indeed, the court agreed with her, and the Immigration and Refugee Board was created. I've been giving guest lectures to students at the University of Winnipeg for many years, and we focus on the Singh decision. This decision gives us hope for positive change, and it shows the importance at both the individual effort and the potential for the judicial system to be part of the solution. My last story involves a member of the Falun Gong in China. My client, who is currently fighting to stay in Canada, has been before the tribunal. Human rights abuses of members of the Falun Gong are well documented. My client was tortured, and she is emotionally exhausted. She fled China without any documents, and she has been trying to have that evidence sent to her. Alas, the Chinese government's draconian surveillance systems has cut her off from her friends and family in China. Her WhatsApp account has been cancelled. Her friend's account has been suspended. She is now afraid that if she continues with her claim, her family members in China will be punished. The reason I bring up this case is to highlight the challenges of fighting human rights abuses in 2021. We deal with modern technological problems, and as immigration and refugee lawyers, we need to tackle them in accordance with the law. While we have the technology that allows me to present to you, wherever you are, modern technology also allows governments to hide behind human rights violations. Finally, I want to end with a call to action. Currently, we're facing the possible extinction if we do not confront climate change. The 1951 Geneva Convention and subsequently Sections 96 and Section 97 of ERPA did not consider that people being displaced from environmental disasters. These people are currently not covered by our laws. I've been working on this issue since 2010. I edited an article by Peter Schauler, who I believe is still teaching at the University of Ottawa, entitled "The Plight of the Eco-Refugee." Climate change is an existential threat, and we need to recognize the risk within the context of refugee law. Thank you, and I look forward to a further discussion on any of these points. I hoped that I have helped spark some change.
Hello, I'm Isha, CEO of the Canadian Museums for Human Rights. Today we celebrate Manitobans doing their part to build communities that have a strong culture of human rights throughout our province. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights lays out that core belief that we are all born free and equal in dignity and in rights. But I actually think we can go beyond that. Our challenge today is to make sure that we can actually live free in dignity and rights every day, that we can all enjoy education, healthcare, homes, relationships, and communities that lift us up. To that end, Article 1 reminds me of something important, that human rights don't mean very much unless people like you and me take it upon ourselves to defend them every day. I believe we're called to take action by our humanity, by our conviction that the world around us is one where we are all protected and empowered by human rights, and that human rights are possible and within our reach. Where securing Indigenous rights, title, language, and land sit at the heart of our efforts to pursue reconciliation. Where truth matters. Where we rededicate ourselves every morning to the idea that everyone in Manitoba is entitled to shape our community. People of all genders and all identities, people of all colors, those who can trace their family lines back hundreds and thousands of years on these lands, or those whose stories as Canadians are just beginning. We can be a community of hope for everyone. We can hold up those in our province who are struggling and celebrate that which makes each of us unique. And we can be people who are inspired by passion and creativity in all forms. And there will be times when we have to challenge the status quo in order to get to that place, because we know that our world doesn't exactly work that way. To challenge someone or something can look like confronting them with an opposing view or idea, a different way of looking at something, a fact that is true that they didn't know about. You believe the earth is flat, or that gender is binary, or that the color of my skin determines my intelligence. I challenge those ideas in my world every day. When we challenge ideas, especially when our beliefs come from our hearts, we feel strong, we feel power, we feel empowered. And there are people in my life, personal and professional, who challenge me every day about things they care about, who raise things that I hadn't considered before. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable, and it can lead to conflict. But being willing to go there, to challenge ideas, can also build understanding. I've been lucky to have worked and volunteered with exceptional people for years, people empowered to make change, call out racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and all forms of discrimination. And I've worked alongside people who called out their bosses for harassing them, who called out their governments to provide better solutions for their children with disabilities, or their school divisions for a safe space, or their landlords to just stop stereotyping. And it was powerful, and it was needed, and it did lead to change. And so to those of you who are watching or listening to this, and particularly to young people, I hope you will remember that you can choose to challenge in whatever way makes sense for you. Just make the choice to do something, anything. It may be a protest or a rally, a club, or a petition. It may be reading a post or article, or commenting it, or sharing it, or liking it, or just telling one person about it. It might be doing something to celebrate and protect the land we're on, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. I got involved in human rights work because I wanted to make a difference. I thought I could change the world. I know that I can't change the world, but I know that we can together. There's no right way to challenge or influence. So choose your way of challenging the world or championing what matters the most to you. And it may be loud and fierce. It may also be gentle and patient. It will be powerful. It is needed. And it will lead to change. I'm sure of it. So while people throughout Manitoba are doing what they can to create a more equitable world, you can choose to challenge yourself and the world around you in whatever way makes sense about the issues that matter to you. I can imagine a lot of people are pretty tired of having to advocate. That might be you, or it might be someone you know. In some ways, it's the burden we carry, the price we pay for being alive, our commitments to one another in Article 1 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights began with our humanity and tie us together in a community, whether we want it to or not. But that community will only be what we want it to be if we all shoulder our share of the work, if we care for those who are doing far more than their fair share of work, and if we reflect on the things we might be doing that are adding to the burdens of others. So today, I hope that I can take all the time with you to reflect a little bit on the choices and challenges we have, the work we have yet to do to change this world. Thanks very much for allowing me to share a little bit today.
Tansi Amin, Gawita Madanawa, Nuihawania Jennifer Moore Rattray. It is really a pleasure to be here today. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am on Treaty 1 land in the heart of the Métis Nation. I'm also a really proud citizen of Peepekasi's Cree Nation and the Chief Operating Officer for Southern Chiefs Organization. I also had the honor of being the Executive Director of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls for the last 14 months of the inquiry, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. I want to thank Manitobans for Human Rights. I'm so pleased to be here and to be part of this important Torch of Dignity event and to come together with all of you to imagine a world in which human rights and human dignity are respected and reflected in everything that we do. Well, the first point I want to make is that Indigenous rights are human rights. Now that seems like a given, but sadly, it's not been our history in Canada. Now, right now, there's a well-documented and long-standing gap in life expectancy between First Nations peoples and all others here in Manitoba, and that gap is 11 years, and it's actually growing. In a recent healthcare survey, and I've got a copy of it here, that we conducted at Southern Chiefs Organization, more than 90% of Southern First Nation people who took the survey agreed that racism is a problem in Manitoba's healthcare system. In another 2021 survey, and this one we conducted on policing, the vast majority of First Nation respondents, more than 88%, agree with the statement, racism is a problem in policing in Manitoba. Right now, in Manitoba, 75% of adults admitted into custody are Indigenous, and by that I mean First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. And in the last 10 years, there has been a 60% increase in the incarceration of Indigenous men and a 139% increase in the incarceration of Indigenous women. Manitoba has the highest number of incarcerated Indigenous women and the highest youth incarceration rates in Canada, and that is according to Statistics Canada. Well, this has to change. Right now, Canada ranks 16th on the UN Human Development Index of all the countries in the world. But because of chronic underfunding and economic apartheid, if you look at First Nations, in an average year, we fall between 63rd and 78th place on that same UN Human Development Index. Well, Canada's darkest periods of history include decades when First Nations people were seen as less than human or less than in our hierarchy of who matters in Canada. This summer, the discovery of the unmarked graves of hundreds of children who attended residential schools was a moment of reckoning in this country. 3 of my family members lie in 2 unmarked graves at Brandon Residential School. The children in these graves awaken a nation, and sadly, there are many more still to be discovered. The word genocide is finally being used, I believe appropriately, to describe the cumulative effect of 150 years of residential schools in 500 years of colonization. Colonial policies in Canada and pre-Canada aimed to obliterate the many Indigenous nations that occupied this land and posed a threat to the settlers. In the 1750s, scalping bounties were offered in Nova Scotia to entice and reward the murder of the Mi'kmaq. The Beothuk are believed to have been completely eliminated by the 1820s. That's a whole people. In addition to the premeditated killing of Indigenous peoples, colonial policies existed that deliberately inflicted conditions calculated to bring about destruction. In the 1870s, as the Canadian Pacific Railway took shape, colonial troops denied food as a means of ethnically cleansing a vast region all the way from Regina to the Alberta border. In the 1880s, government-sanctioned residential schools were created, and Indigenous children faced starvation, deliberate infection of diseases, beatings, torture, rape, solitary confinement, and other assaults. In the early 1900s, government doctors subjected Indigenous children to medical experiments at the schools. This is the cumulative genocide that the National Inquiry identified and named. Well, truth is hard, but reconciliation is even harder because it means looking at our collective history, at our existing systems and structures, as well as our everyday actions, and really examining how we can do them differently. And system change is hard because those who have the power to evolve the system are those who most benefit from the status quo. So how do we reconcile our history, and how do we create change? Well, this is what the National Inquiry's Calls for Justice ask all Canadians to do as a first step. Denounce and speak out against violence against Indigenous, women, girls, two-spirited people, and everyone else. Decolonize by learning the true history of Canada and Indigenous history in your local area. There's a great book by journalist Tanya Talaga. It's based on her CBC Massey lecture, and it's a great place to start. Develop knowledge and read the National Inquiry's final report. Listen to the truth shared and acknowledge the burden of these human and Indigenous rights violations. Become a strong ally, and being an ally involves more than just tolerance. It means actively working to break down barriers and to support others in every relationship and encounter in which you participate. Confront and speak out against racism, sexism, ignorance, homophobia, and transphobia, and teach or encourage others to do the same wherever it occurs. Maybe it's in your workplace, in your social settings, sometimes even in your home, and that can be difficult. Protect, support, and promote the safety of women, girls, two-spirited people, and all other Indigenous peoples by acknowledging and respecting the value of every person and every community. Create time and space for relationships based on respect as human beings, supporting and embracing differences with kindness, with love and respect. And finally, help hold all governments accountable to act on the National Inquiry's Calls for Justice and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's Calls to Action. Indigenous peoples are holders of inherent rights, constitutional rights, and international and domestic human rights. In addition, many Indigenous peoples in Canada are rights holders under various treaties, land claims, and settlement agreements. We are simply asking Canada to live up to its existing obligations it has agreed to, but has not honored to date. So how do we create a Canada where everyone can live together, free of violence and in peace and prosperity? And why is that important? Well, because potential is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. We are all poor as people and communities if not everyone is able to share their gifts and talents. So here are some amazing Indigenous people who have made our province a better place. I have to begin with our Grand Chief, our Southern Grand Chief, Jerry Daniels, who's unifying and amplifying the voices of the Anishinaabe and Dakota peoples. Dr. Marcia Anderson and Melanie McKinnon of Ungamasman Health Services, and also Nurse Cindy Garson, whose leadership throughout this pandemic has saved lives. Betty Adele and Jamie Dumont, who are making history as the first Indigenous chair and vice chair of the Winnipeg School Division. Eva Fontaine of Anish Corporation and Wayne Mason of Wasay Healing Center, and the other incredible leaders of the Indian Residential School healing programs who do the hard work every day to help survivors and intergenerational survivors find hope and find healing. Phil Fontaine, whose courage in speaking out about the residential schools led to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, and in turn to the National Inquiry. Former Judge and Senator, the Honourable Maurice St. Clair. And Leslie Spillett, who founded Ganiganichik in Winnipeg's inner city and so many other entities and events. Leslie created a place where Indigenous peoples can truly find their way home. And there are so many others. These are really the human rights heroes in our city, in our province. They're with us, they walk among us every day, and they're doing such incredible work. As I conclude, we really are the sum of all of the sacrifices that our ancestors have made. Our time and our energy are limited, and that makes them precious. What is each one of us doing every day to reconcile with each other? To breathe life into that momentous word reconciliation, which will help to end the inequities and the injustices and restore the dignity of every sacred human being. Well, as others have said, we write our history as a country and as individuals every single day, and that history is up to each one of us. Egosani, all my relations.
As the Assembly of First Nations, Manitoba Regional Chief, I am very pleased to participate in the 2021 Torch of Dignity Relay. As a political leader, I have sparked change by working every day to bring Indigenous and non-Indigenous people together. Respectful relationships require communication and understanding. I have also sparked change by joining the increasing number of First Nations women assuming leadership positions, whether that is in politics, business, academia, or the professions. My responsibility as a regional chief include public education about human rights, which includes the right of First Nations. My voice as a political leader enables me to speak at the provincial and national level on human rights matters impacting First Nations. I can spark change by carrying the important message to all Manitobans, ensuring the human rights of all people benefits everyone. Respecting human rights means ensuring peace and security for all of us. I can see that more and more Manitobans and Canadians are coming to realize the most fundamental right and responsibility we have to each other is maintaining a healthy environment. The climate emergency is showing us every day that we can only do this by working together. I also enjoy talking about the meaning of the treaty relationship and its role in ensuring respect of fundamental human rights, including First Nations' right to self-determination. This is because the value of treaty and the value of human rights have a lot in common. I want people to know that the core values of First Nations are centered around respectful relationships with every person, every nation, and with all of the natural world. Treaty is founded in the belief that all individuals and all people must be treated with dignity and respect. Both treaty and human rights maintain that we all have responsibilities to each other. It is clear that we have a lot of work to do to address the legacy of the Indian residential school system. This includes finding and treating with respect and love the Indigenous children lying in unmarked graves, as well as many other human rights issues affecting Indigenous peoples in Manitoba. First Nations are leading this sensitive work and appreciate the support of Manitobans. First Nations leadership in Manitoba also continue to press forward to overhaul the discriminatory child welfare systems. This is what every child matter means. Every unnamed child lying in an unmarked grave matters. Every First Nation child lost to the child welfare system matters. Every survivor of the Indian residential school who struggles with the trauma and hate matters. Every parent and family member of a child harmed by the Indian residential school system and the discriminatory aspect of the child welfare system matters. We are here for you today and every day. We will never forget, and we will never stop fighting for you, because every child does matter. Chimigwech.